Hello and welcome to Resilience, the global adaptation podcast, the show where we'll be exploring the best solutions and cutting-edge technologies for adapting to climate change.
From climate-resilient forests to the use of artificial intelligence to the power of storytelling, we are coming to you from the United Nations Environment Programme. I'm Liz Bernhardt.
And I'm Marcus Neild. In our podcast, we'll be talking to the world's greatest adaptation experts, but we'll also be travelling around the world to meet people on the front lines of climate change to hear personal stories of how they've built resilience.
We're really excited to share some incredible climate success stories with you. Join us as we adapt to climate change, one conversation at a time.
2024 is on track to be the hottest year in recorded history. Of the last 16 months, why don't you take a guess at how many of these months smashed global temperature records? 15 out of 16. Just worth thinking about that for a second.
Right, so this year alone, we've seen heat waves devastating parts of Asia, scorching cities across the USA and Mexico, and turning parts of the Middle East into furnaces. And behind these headlines are real human stories. Millions of people struggling to endure pretty much unbearable temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius. As we'll hear from our guests in today's episode, outdoor workers in particular face impossible choices. They can either endure the heat and its health impacts or lose their livelihoods.
And there's a major problem with how we keep cool. Our air conditioning systems use tons of fossil fuels, which only makes the problem worse. So while our houses stay cool, the planet does not. So what's the solution? The question is more urgent than ever, and the UN Secretary General's call to action on extreme heat is bringing together experts from across the globe to tackle it head on.
Today we're talking to two people at the forefront of this fight. Professor of Cold Economy Toby Peters is a pioneer in sustainable cooling and systems-level solutions. And Shahzad Qureshi is a man on a mission to create forests in our cities to shield them from brutal heat. Together, they're going to show us why tackling extreme heat requires a mix of bold innovation and a radical rethink of how we keep cool.
So first, let's meet Toby Peters. I think there are probably very few people on this planet that know more about this topic than Toby. He takes us into the heart of the problem. Why does cooling touch everything, from health to food systems to transportation? And what happens when even the best solutions aren't enough? Toby, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So why don't we start with some basic definitions? What does cold economy mean?
So cooling is critical infrastructure for food, health, safe places to live and work, data, and the global demand for cooling is already very much pressurizing the energy system and the environment. And given all the societal and economic benefits of cooling and cold chain, but those environmental risks, we really need to develop and deploy sustainable, affordable, and resilient cooling solutions. Achieving this requires a new approach to cooling and cold chain provision that starts by asking what energy services are needed and explores ways to meet them with minimum environmental impact, not simply defaulting to electricity to generate cooling. And such a system-level approach sits at the core of the cold economy. We're exploring the development of integrated, needs-driven, rather than demand-driven, resource-smart, system-level strategies to mitigate the need for mechanical cooling, and then to understand and identify the multiple cooling needs across buildings, food, vaccines, health, cold chains, transport, and explore how we can aggregate the opportunities.
Toby, it'd be great if you can tell us a bit about why the world needs so desperately to find new solutions and innovation to extreme heat. In other words, what will the future look like if we continue on our current trajectory without new cooling solutions?
Well, let's just sort of maybe step back a second. You know, if you go back to the beginning of the 20th century, ice harvesting was a major industry, and there were in actual fact 2,000 commercial plants in America shipping ice around the world. And then with the advent of electrical refrigerators and then air conditioners, we've now arrived at a situation where more than 13 cooling devices are being deployed every second. So we'll rely on cooling to such an extent that it actually counts for 7% of all global greenhouse emissions. Cooling is also the fastest growing cause of greenhouse gas emissions. But despite this, if we actually want to deliver cooling for all and address the challenges of the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to deliver 18 cooling devices per second over the next 30 years. So in short, without radical intervention, we're going to miss our social development goals and we're going to miss our climate target.
So that's really interesting. And obviously, a major part of this is how our homes and buildings are constructed and how our homes and buildings keep us cool. You referred to that earlier as a key part of this, obviously, not the whole part. Just in terms of our homes and our buildings, could you expand on some innovations and solutions that you see as really strong in this sector of buildings and constructions?
Even today, in a temperate climate like the UK, probably 90% of hospital buildings are vulnerable to the overheating. 55% of UK residential dwellings would fail to meet bedroom overheating criteria today. Go to, say, Calcutta in India, where you've got the summer indoor average heat stress index temperature is about 5.29 degrees Celsius higher than the temperature outside. So these are a dangerous level. Space cooling, keeping buildings at the right temperature, was responsible for about 10% of the world's total electricity consumption in 2016 when it was last measured. And there's got a 300% anticipated increase by 2050 without intervention. So left unchecked, electricity demand for space cooling by 2050 will consume as much electricity as China and India today. So this is going to really make how do we run our grids, how do we keep them operating, how do we meet our greenhouse gas emissions, really, really challenging. What can we do? Well, obviously, you've got different levels of intervention. The first one, we've got passive methods, the natural cooling, orientation, shading, reflective surfaces, those sorts of good designs. Then you can take that up into the wider built environment, the water courses, green spaces, better design of street level airflows. We can look at district cooling networks. So how do you actually create system level solutions to cool buildings rather than relying on individual cooling devices? In short, the problem we've got here is that when we talk about energy, we inherently mean electricity. And then when we talk about energy storage, we mean chemical batteries. But most of our energy demand is thermal. It's historically heating in the global north and cooling in the global south. But until we stop sort of locking ourselves into electrons, we won't see the paradigm shift required. So what we have to do is we've got to stop asking, how can we green electricity and make technologies more efficient? But think about what the service is required and how we can provide it in the most truly energy efficient way.
I'm quite interested in the area of nature-based solutions for cooling, which are gaining quite a lot of attention. Can you help explain a bit about what people mean by that and why you think they're becoming so popular?
So in short, what we're looking to do is harness the power of nature to increase cities' resilience or farming resilience against extreme heat. Things that we can do to mitigate the need for mechanical cooling whilst improving thermal comfort. Whilst we're reading about these solutions and people get excited, is actually the implementation is lagging behind the opportunity. And this is due to barriers around the planning of natural-based solutions in the urban master plans, knowledge gaps on the effectiveness, the business models, and also the fact probably that you're designing things here which are long-term investments in a short-term political cycle. So we've really got to recognize this opportunity, but we've got to look at it from a system level.
What do you think are some of the most exciting innovations in sustainable cooling that you're seeing right now?
It's a really important opportunity, but what we have to be careful about is we can't see anything as a panacea. The first thing we need to do is, once we understand the need, is mitigate the demand for cooling. So that's in the good design, that's in the use of the nature-based solutions. But we are still going to need active cooling solutions to both provide the level of thermal comfort that we require, and also, to look and provide the cooling we need for our food, our health. But where these work is that they are critical, and we've got to bring them into the system as the start point to mitigate the need. We're not going to hit the demand or the need for cooling and mitigate the energy and environmental requirement without actually designing our buildings and everything to take off that mechanical load. It's a really wicked problem. I mean, what I'm trying to do, if you look at, say, food, cold chain, how do we feed 10 billion people? How, at the same time, do we protect 400 million smallholder farmers and economically empower them when they're dependent on 1 or 2 hectares of land? And how do we do that without using diesel in a fast warming world? We've got to solve all of those challenges simultaneously, because if you solve any one of them on its own, it's going to undermine the others.
So this topic of cooling is something that UNEP is doing a huge amount of work on. And I know that you are currently doing some work with the Africa Centre of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain, which is an initiative that some of our colleagues at UNEP are really passionate about. So could you please tell us a little bit about this Centre of Excellence? What does it do, and why is it so important?
The Africa Centre of Excellence for Sustainable Cooling and Cold Chain is a new initiative funded by the governments of the UK and Rwanda. It's a partnership initiative. And what we're trying to do is look at this from a systems approach. So it's the first of a kind centre anywhere in the world which actually takes a systems approach from the farm to the market. So we have built a centre which has training, technology demonstration, business model development, policy. It's got its own 200-hectare farm, so we can look at right the way through from the point of harvest to the point of consumption, the quality control, the packing solutions in a single element.
Another initiative that you've been working on with UNEP is the Cool Coalition. Would you mind explaining a bit about what that is and why it was set up?
So the Cool Coalition is really, really important. So on the one hand, you've got to develop the technologies and be assured, whilst I look at systems, we're doing a lot of work on novel technologies. But what you also need to do is you need to engage and change the policy. And so the Cool Coalition, it's a point where we all come together to look at the challenges and the solutions and share and build collaboration and cohesion between people who are interested in different elements, but also understanding what is the size of the problem and the size of the need. So it gathers great data on the demand for cooling and the challenges required. And then also the policy activity. So actually engaging the policymakers, because at the end of the day, if we're going to shift the needle, we need the policymakers to understand and recognize how important it is. So the Cool Coalition is a critical part of changing the landscape, where it takes cooling from something which was essential to our lives but invisible to something which is essential to our future and has a seat at the table.
That's great. So just a final question. How can our audience follow the great work you're doing? Do you have somewhere online that you'd like to point our listeners?
The program in Africa and India, we've packaged it or branded it under the Clean Cooling Network. And that's really where we've got that. And obviously my work at Birmingham is through the Centre for Sustainable Cooling. Through the network, we're having regular webinars about the challenges, the issues, the opportunities, what are the policy environment, the financing issues.
Great. So we can add links to those initiatives also in the notes for the podcast. Okay, that was Toby Peters, Professor of Cold Economy at the University of Birmingham. From the science of cooling to the art of resilience, let's head now to Karachi, Pakistan, a city where temperatures can soar past 50 degrees Celsius. where stepping outside feels like walking into an oven. How do you even cope or work in those kinds of conditions?
For Shahzad Qureshi, the answer lies in the power of forests. He's the founder behind the urban forest movement, a goal to create a vibrant cooling oasis in our cities using the Miyawaki method of tree planting, where an essential principle is using native tree species. In this discussion, Shahzad reveals how you can turn barren land into a thriving green space, and we discuss the ripple effects it's having on people's lives.
Hi, Shahzad. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Hi, how are you, Liz, Marcus?
We're great. So, Shahzad, I come from Chicago and it gets really hot. But in Karachi, I understand you have heat waves that can reach 45 degrees Celsius or higher. What kind of impact does that have on people's lives and livelihoods?
I don't know how to explain the word unbearable is unless you are in that circumstances, you can't really feel that the ability to not breathe because it's so hot, and you don't know what is going to work for you when you're stepping outside. It's extremely difficult for people to actually function in that temperature. 45 degrees centigrade with a 70 to 80% of relative humidity means wet bulb temperatures of over 52 degrees centigrade. Basically, human body stops functioning at that level, and if you're exposed to most of that time, you are sweating excessively, you're losing your electrolytes, you start obviously getting fatigued, and heat stroke is generally the end result of this if you're outside in that kind of environment and trying to function or work actually.
And on a day like that, when it's 45 degrees, what does your community look like in Karachi? Like, what are the streets like? I mean, what do people do?
When it gets to that point, it generally, now that we try to announce this a lot more, that heat waves are coming or it's going to be excessively hot and bring things, bring a lot of excessive water with you. We try to set up, government tries to set up camps in different places. Individuals do that sometimes, so that people can rest in shade and have water. But by and large, people try to come out and try to work, but then it shows a very deserted streets actually. So it is mostly you would see people actually wetting their small towels or handkerchiefs and putting it on their heads most of the time, because evaporation generally helps a lot. But if the humidity levels are so high, even that doesn't function well because it doesn't evaporate that easily.
Is this happening a lot?
So the days over 40 degrees centigrades are increasing every year. Days over 40 degrees centigrades were over 18 or 20 or something like that. But even if it's when around over 35 degrees centigrade and higher relative humidity, becomes very, very difficult to manage for people. When you research on this, obviously, you see that the paved areas or the built up area of the city has increased tremendously. And obviously, that adds to the heat island effect and it adds to the NR. We have been constantly cutting down our green cover and cool. So, that whole trend has compounded, obviously, even a slight improve in the temperature or increase in the temperature results in very, very hot surroundings and environment, and you can't cool it down easily.
It sounds like you've been part of something extremely innovative in order to combat the heat that you're talking about, but also exactly those kinds of green spaces. And we know about an initiative called Urban Forest in Karachi that's set up to combat this extreme heat, exactly this issue. Can you tell us about what it is?
So, 2015, we went through the first actually recognized heat wave in the city, where we were just completely caught off guard. And there were over 2,000 deaths in the city. So they were actually morgues filled. I mean, we dug mass graves in a peacetime, and everybody was extremely, extremely shocked. And just around that time, I came across this methodology on the internet. Actually, there was a TED talk by a gentleman called Shubhendu Sharma, And he talked about just creating a small forest right in your backyard. And we were like, okay, this has to be tried. So I invited that gentleman over and to come and actually do a pilot for us. And he did that. And we instantly, you know, calling something a forest with a very small, tiny footprint, it was a, for even for me, it was a, should we even call that? It's too small. It's but it just, it the whole concept actually, people started, it caught fire with them, because urban forest in a city, how's that supposed to be? How can we have forest in a city? So it is a very magical plantation methodology, and the results really, really surprise you. And they still surprise me every time I have done a forest and I go back to it after a few months, and then it surprises the hell out of me, the growth part of
Do
it.
you think people appreciate all the benefits like you do, the benefits that that forest provides to them?
They do now. Um, I don't know if you had a look at the overall what the concept of the whole park that we envisioned initially, and then how it actually turned up when you go in there. What I wanted to feel eventually, a completely, really a forest experience. You go in and you are completely isolated from your surroundings, and you are in the middle of trees and woods and birds chirping. It's out of this world situation, really.
Shahzad, so when people walked into this forest, this park in Karachi, they must have noticed a difference in temperature. What was their reaction?
Our claims generally that forest has X, Y, and Z benefits of, why are we even creating a forest, is because temperature control and better air quality and so on and so forth. Um, we When we claim it, that's one thing. But I generally, what I let people is when they walk into the space or into the park forest, and I let them come back to me and say, oh, I feel a little cooler here. Oh, the temperature is a little better here. And that just fuels me up with so much energy. Luckily, the whole Miyawaki foresting became popular across the country. We had a chance to go and do projects in other cities of the country. We've gone to Lahore, we have gone to Faisalabad and Islamabad, and Pakistan became the first government actually that adopted the Miyawaki method as a supplemental complementary technique to go to green the cities and increase the tree cover in the cities.
So you mentioned the Miyawaki method. Do you want to maybe just explain what the Miyawaki method actually is, and sort of why it's so effective?
Miyawaki method is based on the learnings and teachings of Dr. Akira Miyawaki, who was a phenomenal botanist out of Japan. He worked on this theory called potential natural vegetation, which states that every piece of land on this planet has its own potential natural vegetation, which has evolved over centuries and millions of years, which balances the life there, right? It hosts and balances the life there. And if you actually find those species and put them back together, they will respond to that, the same DNA that they have. So that's what we do. We put together in a Miyawaki method the native species of the area very densely, anywhere from 3 saplings per square meter to about 8 or 9 saplings per square meter, based on where you're planting them. And you work with the soil. What it's lacking now at that given time is the microbiology, the life within the soil itself. So we put that back. We put a lot of organic matter back into the soil. So that becomes a food for the microorganisms. And we give it a shot of microorganisms which are supposed to be there. And lo and behold, it just grows like a wildfire. And
Shahzad, the name of the show, we've called it Resilience. And it seems to me like you really embody the spirit of resilience with what you've been through and what you've achieved over more than the past decade with lots of doubting Thomases. So, what has kept you going?
It was absolutely for my personal satisfaction to start with. I started off, oh my God, I will have my own little forest. That's where it started off. And I'm like, okay, how about, just let's scale it a bit. Let's do this park. And those experiences has been extremely rewarding when you see something like that happening. It's you want to keep doing it to start with. If not you, then who else is a question I ask.
I think that might be a really perfect way to end, Shahzad. So really like to thank you for coming onto the show today. So just a final question, really. How can we follow your work online?
So I've been mostly active, or our website is one, and more than the website, which is urbanforest.pk. And more than that is a Facebook group called Urban Forest Pakistan, which is the most active place where our material and all our updates actually go in. So yeah, so Facebook group is one, and then the website, and yeah, I'm available if anybody needs any information anytime or any help.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Liz.
That was Shahzad Qureshi from Karachi, Pakistan. A super inspirational story where we heard about his dream of creating an urban forest in Karachi. He's brought that dream to reality, and it's proof that even in the harshest environments, we can build resilience with creativity, grit, and determination. And with Toby Peters, we got a systems-wide view, hearing about some of the initiatives making a real difference, like the Cool Coalition. Links to these initiatives are in our show notes.
And before we go, if you want to dig deeper into sustainable cooling solutions, then check out a very recent report called Cooler Finance. We're going to leave you with just a few striking stats from the report. Sustainable cooling solutions could generate $8 trillion of benefits by 2050. So 8 trillion sounds like a sort of incomprehensible number to get your head around. So just to put that in perspective, that's about 15% of the entire global economy. These solutions could also slash our emissions from cooling by 50% by that year 2050. The report then lays out what's required to achieve this goal, from passive cooling solutions like insulation to enforcing minimum energy standards.
And the report also provides recommendations on how to deliver the Global Cooling Pledge. That's a pledge that has brought together over 71 governments in the world. That's more than a third of all of our countries, and countless other organizations in a shared mission to slash cooling-related emissions by almost 70% by 2050. We'll put a link to the report and the Global Cooling Pledge in the show notes for you.
So that's it from us. Thanks so much to Toby, to Shahzad, and of course to our listeners. Join us next time as we adapt to climate change, one conversation at a time.
This show is funded by the Japanese Ministry of the Environment. Richard Myron is the producer, and this has been an Earshot Strategies production.